They tell you that strength is everything in a world where your body can split open and remake itself into claws and fangs. That if you can't shift, you're not just weak, you're incomplete. A half-finished sentence, a promise someone forgot to keep. But here's the part they don't mention in the fairy tales. When you're incomplete, you become invisible. And when you're invisible long enough, you stop fearing what people can do to you. Because the worst thing? They've already done it. This isn't a story about becoming strong. This is about what happens when the weakest person in the room is the only one stupid enough to reach for the one thing no one else can hold. And when she does, the king learns that promises are the most dangerous magic of all. Chapter 1. The moon sword ceremony happened once every 50 years. They said the sword was forged from a fallen star, that it could only be lifted by the kingdom's true ruler, that it chose worthiness over bloodline. They said a lot of things. Most of them were lies designed to make people feel better about the previous king keeping power for 3 centuries. But King Aldrich was dying. No heirs, no clear succession, just a sword stuck in a stone altar and a promise that echoed through every pack in the realm. Whoever lifts the moon sword shall rule beside me as consort and heir. I care not for rank, bloodline, or pack affiliation. The sword will choose, and I will honor its choice. Noble words, except everyone knew whoever meant whichever alpha manages to do it, because alphas were strong. Alphas could shift into forms that could tear through stone. Alphas were worthy. And me? I was packless, mateless, shiftless. I was there because I had nowhere else to be. They came one by one, the strongest alphas from every territory. Some could shift mid-stride, fur rippling across skin like water. Others had eyes that glowed with ancestral power. All of them believed. The sword didn't budge, not for strength, not for magic, not for bloodline or reputation or political alliance. After the 37th attempt, people started leaving. After the 42nd, the king's expression changed from anticipation to something darker. He'd promised whoever lifted it, but what if no one could? That's when I felt it. Not a voice, not a pull, just recognition. Like when you hear your name in a crowded room, except the name being called wasn't the one my parents gave me. It was the one I'd carved into my own bones after everything else was taken away. Survivor. I didn't plan to move. I certainly didn't plan to walk through the crowd of alphas still lingering near the platform. But my feet were already carrying me forward, and my hands, my empty, powerless hands, were already reaching. Is that an omega? Someone stop them before they embarrass themselves. The sword would sooner shatter than let an omega. I said whoever. Let them approach. The king's voice cut through the noise like a blade, and suddenly every eye in that amphitheater burned into my back. I could feel their disgust, their pity, their certainty that I was about to humiliate myself in front of the entire kingdom. But here's what they didn't understand about people like me. People who've already lost everything. We've got nothing left to lose, which means we're the only ones free enough to try. I wrapped my fingers around the hilt. The metal was cold, impossibly cold, like touching the space between stars. And then it spoke, not in words, in feeling. Forgotten, used, discarded. Do you know these words? Yes. The sword moved, 6 inches, then a foot. Then it lifted free from the stone entirely, light pouring from the blade like trapped moonlight flooding the amphitheater. Impossible! It's a trick, some kind of omega manipulation magic. But it wasn't magic, at least not the kind they understood. The moon sword didn't want strength. It didn't want power or ambition or divine right. It wanted someone who understood what it felt like to be used as a weapon and still choose to be held. The amphitheater exploded. Shouts, accusations. 3 alphas shifted mid-crowd in rage, had to be restrained by guards. But through it all, I heard only one sound. The king whispering 2 words that changed everything. No, not them. I'd lifted the sword. I'd fulfilled the prophecy. I'd won. So why did the king look like I'd just signed both our death warrants? They didn't take me to the throne room. They didn't announce my victory. They didn't even let me keep the sword. Instead, they marched me through service corridors and down 3 flights of stairs I didn't know existed until we reached a door I'd never seen before. The king's private chambers, where consorts were made and unmade behind closed doors. King Aldrich was already inside, waiting. The sword rested on a table between us like a corpse neither of us wanted to claim. He looked at me the way you'd look at an unexpected bill you couldn't pay, or a diagnosis you'd been dreading. Do you have any idea what you've done? I could have played innocent, could have pretended I didn't understand, but I was so tired of pretending. I lifted the sword. You made a promise. Are you going to break it because you don't like who the sword chose? The sword didn't choose you. It recognized you. There's a difference. Then explain it to me, because from where I'm standing, recognition sounds an awful lot like choice. That sword is cursed. It was cursed the day my father betrayed the pact with the moon goddess, and it's been killing every monarch who touches it for 300 years. Slowly, agonizingly, from the inside out. He pulled open his shirt. Black veins spread from his heart like cracks in glass, pulsing with the same rhythm as the sword on the table. I've been dying for 20 years, and the only thing keeping me alive is that no one has been able to lift the sword and complete the bond. Until you. I stared at the black veins spreading across his chest like a map of suffering, at the sword pulsing with the same silver light that had crawled up my arms, at the king who looked like he was barely holding himself together, and I started laughing. This is amusing to you? I've been rejected by my mate, cast out by my pack, told I'm worthless because I can't shift. I've been spit on, starved, and used as a bargaining chip by my own father. And now you're telling me the one thing I managed to do right is actually a death sentence? Your Majesty, that's not tragedy. That's just my life staying consistent. You think this is funny? I think the universe has a sense of humor, and I'm the punchline. Now tell me the rest. Because there's always more with curses. The king studied me with something between confusion and reluctant respect. The bond works both ways. Whoever lifts the sword becomes bound to the crown. My pain becomes yours. My death becomes yours. It's already started. You'll feel it within the week. Silver veins had already begun appearing faintly on my wrists, delicate as spider silk and just as deadly. How long? How long what? How long before it kills me? 6 months. Maybe a year if you're strong. Longer than I expected to live anyway. What else? What do you mean, what else? Did you not hear the part where you're going to die? I heard you. I'm asking if there's a way to break the curse, because if there is, you would have already done it, which means there's a catch you're not telling me. Silence stretched between us like a blade being slowly unsheathed. The curse can only be broken if someone lifts the sword willingly accepting death with no expectation of reward or rescue. A true sacrifice. But the sword won't let anyone sacrifice themselves for someone else. It only responds to those who think their life has so little value that ending it wouldn't matter. And there it was, the truth neither of us wanted to say out loud. The sword hadn't chosen me because I was worthy. It had chosen me because I was ready to disappear. And now we were both trapped, him dying slowly, me dying faster, bound together by a curse that fed on our mutual worthlessness. So what happens now? Now, we honor the promise. You become my consort. We marry in 3 days before the court, and we pretend this is a love match instead of a double execution. And when you die, I'll make sure you're remembered as a hero, not as the Omega the sword mistook for salvation. He said it like a gift, like remembering me was the best thing he could offer. He didn't understand yet. I didn't want to be remembered as a hero. And if I refuse? If I walk away right now? The bond is already formed. You can't walk away. If you leave the castle grounds, the curse accelerates. You'd be dead in days instead of months, and I'd... He stopped himself. You'd what? I'd die knowing I'd killed you for my father's mistakes. Is that what you want to hear? I looked at this king, this alpha who could command armies and reshape borders with a word, and saw something I recognized. He was just as trapped as I was, just wearing prettier chains. 3 days until the wedding? Yes. Then I have 3 days to figure out how to break this curse, because I didn't survive everything I've survived just to die as someone's tragic footnote. I walked to the sword and placed my hand on it deliberately. It pulsed with light at my touch, brighter than before, almost eager. And neither did you. You think you can break a 300-year-old curse in 3 days? No, but I think I can figure out what it actually wants, because curses don't last 300 years unless they're waiting for something specific, and I'm very good at understanding things that have been waiting to be seen. The sword pulsed again, louder this time, almost like agreement. The king didn't answer, but he didn't order me to leave either. As I walked out, I heard him speak, so quietly I almost missed it. Please don't give me hope. I can't survive hope-breaking too. I didn't turn back, didn't reassure him, because hope wasn't what either of us needed. We needed someone angry enough to call a 300-year-old curse's bluff. And anger? That I had in abundance. The bond was formed, the curse was active, and the Omega had 3 days to do what 300 years of kings could not, prove that someone deemed worthless could break a curse designed to feed on exactly that belief. Chapter 2. They gave me chambers fit for a consort. Silk sheets, marble floors, windows that overlooked gardens I'd never be allowed to walk through alone. Everything was beautiful. Everything was a cage. The silver veins had spread overnight. They crawled up my forearms now, delicate and deadly, pulsing in time with a heartbeat that wasn't entirely my own anymore. When I pressed my fingers to my wrist, I could feel 2 rhythms fighting for dominance, mine and his. The king was dying, which meant I was dying, and we had 72 hours to figure out how to stop it. I spent the first day in the castle's archive, not the public library where visiting nobles pretended to read, the real archive. 3 floors underground, guarded by a scholar so old she might have been there when the curse was first cast. She didn't ask why I wanted records about the moon sword. She just looked at the veins on my arms and pointed to a section in the back where dust lay thick as snow. Everything about the curse is there, though I should warn you, everyone who's tried to break it has ended up in the royal crypts. You won't be the first clever Omega to think they've found a loophole. How many have tried? 17, though only 3 of them actually lifted the sword. The others just studied themselves to death. She said it like it was a reasonable way to go. The records were worse than I expected, not because they were incomplete, but because they were too complete. 300 years of kings trying everything: blood rituals, moon ceremonies, sacrificing livestock, sacrificing enemies. One king even tried sacrificing himself, but the curse wouldn't let him die. It just made him immortal and suffering until his own guard put him down like a rabid dog. But there was a pattern I kept seeing. Every account mentioned the same thing. The sword responded to recognition. Not love, not worthiness. Recognition. It had recognized me. But what had it recognized? My worthlessness? My readiness to die? Or something else entirely? I was still reading when the door opened. I didn't need to look up to know it was him. The bond hummed between us like a plucked string, and suddenly I could feel his exhaustion like it was my own. You've been down here for 14 hours. Time well spent. Did you know your great-great-grandfather tried to break the curse by marrying the sword itself? Apparently he had a whole ceremony. Consummation attempt and everything. I'm aware. The details are in the private journals. He died 3 days later with silver poisoning in his bloodstream and a very confusing expression on his face. I finally looked up. The king looked worse than he had yesterday. The black veins had spread further up his neck, and there were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. You're getting worse. The bond is complete now. The curse recognizes that someone finally lifted the sword, so it's accelerating. Trying to finish what it started before we figure out how to stop it. How long do you have? How long do we have? He corrected me with something that might have been a smile if it wasn't so bitter. 2 days, maybe 3 if we're lucky, though luck hasn't exactly been our specialty. I stood up and the room tilted. The king caught me before I hit the floor, and the moment his hands touched my arms, the bond flared so bright I could see it behind my eyelids, silver and black twining together like smoke. You need to rest. You're not used to this kind of magic. I'm not used to dying, but I'm a fast learner. This isn't a joke. I know, but if I stop making jokes, I'll start screaming, and I don't think either of us has the energy for that right now. He helped me to a chair, and I hated how steady his hands were, how careful, like I was something breakable instead of something already broken. Why did you look so horrified when I lifted the sword? The question came out before I could stop it. The king went very still. Because I knew what it meant, that the sword had found someone who matched its requirements, someone who genuinely believed their life had no value. And that horrified you? Yes. He said it simply, like it was obvious, because it meant I was going to watch another person die for my father's mistakes, and this time it would be someone who didn't even fight back because they agreed with the curse's assessment of their worth. I stared at him, at this king who was dying and still somehow more concerned about me than himself. You don't even know me. I know enough. I know you stood in front of that sword after watching 42 alphas fail. I know you didn't flinch when I told you about the curse. I know you've spent 14 hours reading records that have driven scholars to madness, looking for a solution instead of accepting death. He paused. And I know that when you laugh, it sounds like something that learned how to make noise in the dark. The words hit me harder than they should have. No one had ever described me like that, like I was worth observing, worth remembering. The curse wants a willing sacrifice, someone who accepts death without expecting rescue or reward. Yes. But I lifted the sword, which means I already qualified, so why hasn't it killed me yet? The king blinked, then again, like I'd just asked a question no one had thought to ask in 300 years. I don't know. Maybe because I'm not actually willing to die. But you said, I said I expected to die. That's different from wanting to. I leaned forward, ignoring the way the room spun. I've spent my entire life being told I'm worthless, being treated like I'm disposable, but I never agreed with them. I just learned to survive them. Then why did the sword respond to you? Because it recognized someone who's been used as a weapon, someone who knows what it feels like to be held by people who don't care if you break. I looked at the records spread across the table. The curse doesn't want death, it wants understanding. It's been waiting 300 years for someone to pick up that sword and say, I know what you are. The king sat down heavily in the chair across from me. If you're right, then breaking the curse isn't about sacrifice, it's about recognition, real recognition, not just lifting the sword, but understanding what it actually is. And what is it? I picked up one of the oldest records, a journal entry from the first king who'd been cursed, written 3 days before he died. It says here that your ancestor betrayed a pact with the moon goddess, that he promised to honor her gift and instead used it to conquer and control. He turned something sacred into a weapon. Yes, that's common knowledge. But what if the curse isn't punishment? What if it's the goddess trying to fix what he broke? I met his eyes. The sword isn't looking for someone to die. It's looking for someone who can hold power without corrupting it. Someone who's been powerless and didn't become a monster because of it. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. Both of them, actually. Mine and his, sinking slowly into the same rhythm. 300 years, 17 attempts, countless scholars and mages and priests. The king's voice was barely a whisper. And you figured it out in 14 hours by asking the one question no one else thought to ask. What question? Why hasn't it killed you yet? He laughed, sharp and surprised. Because everyone else was so busy trying to avoid death, they never stopped to wonder why death was being delayed. So, how do we break it? I don't know, but if you're right, it means the curse is waiting for something. Some action or realization or promise. We both said it at the same time. I grabbed another record, hands shaking. Every account mentions promises. Your ancestor broke a promise. The curse was sealed with a promise. You made a promise about whoever lifted the sword. Promises are binding magic, older than contracts or oaths. They reshape reality itself when spoken with true intent. Then we need to make a new promise, one that counters the original betrayal. What kind of promise could possibly... Not to use power as a weapon, to honor it instead. I looked at him, at this king who'd been dying for 20 years and still tried to protect an Omega he'd just met. You need to promise the sword that you'll never use it the way your ancestor did, and I need to promise that I'll make sure you keep that promise. That's not sacrifice, that's just a vow. Exactly. The curse doesn't want death. It wants accountability. It wants someone to finally promise the thing your ancestor should have promised 300 years ago. The king stood up and walked to the window. The setting sun painted him in shades of gold and shadow, and I could see the black veins pulsing in his neck like a countdown. If you're wrong, we'll both be dead by dawn. And if I'm right, we'll break a 300-year curse with nothing but words and intent. Either way, it's better than dying in our sleep. He turned back to me, and there was something in his expression I couldn't quite name, something between terror and hope. You're the most infuriating person I've ever met. I've been called worse. And the bravest. That stopped me cold. No one had ever called me brave. Stupid, maybe, reckless, self-destructive, but never brave. We'll need the sword, and we'll need to do this before the court tomorrow. If we're going to rewrite 300 years of curse work, we should probably not have an audience in case something goes catastrophically wrong. Catastrophically wrong like what? Like us exploding, or merging into one cursed entity, or opening a rift to the moon goddess's realm and having to explain ourselves directly. He said it like these were all reasonable possibilities. Curse breaking isn't an exact science. They brought the sword to the king's chambers at midnight. The servants who carried it looked terrified, like the blade might suddenly decide to lift itself and start judging people. Maybe it would. At this point, nothing would surprise me. The king dismissed everyone, and suddenly we were alone with the weapon that had bound us together. It sat on the table between us, pulsing with that strange silver light, waiting. I've never made a promise to a cursed object before. Is there a protocol? I think we just speak to it, like it's listening, because it is. Right, of course, the sentient sword. He took a breath. Shall we? I placed my hand on the sword's hilt. The king placed his hand over mine. The bond between us flared so bright I had to close my eyes against it. And then we spoke. Not rehearsed, not planned, just the truth we'd been carrying. I am King Aldrich, descendant of the man who broke faith with you, who turned a sacred gift into a weapon of conquest, who promised honor and delivered only pain. I am the one who lifted you, not because I wanted power, but because I recognized what you'd become, a weapon that didn't want to be a weapon, a gift that remembered what it was supposed to be. I promised to never use you for conquest, to never turn power into cruelty. I promise to make sure he keeps that promise, to stand between him and corruption, to remind him what sacred means. I promise to honor what you were meant to be. I promise to help you remember. The sword went supernova. Light exploded through the room, silver and black and something else, something that felt like moonlight on water, like promises kept after centuries of breaking. The veins on my arms burned like brands, and I heard the king gasp as the black veins on his chest began to recede. The curse was listening, and for the first time in 300 years, it heard what it had been waiting for. When the light faded, we were both on the floor. The sword lay between us, dormant and quiet. No more pulsing, no more hungry light, just a sword. I checked my arms. The silver veins were gone. Not faded, gone, like they'd never been there. The king pulled open his shirt with shaking hands. His chest was clear, no black veins, no cracks spreading from his heart, just skin and scars and the rapid rise and fall of someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without pain. It's gone. The curse is gone. We stared at each other across the sword that had almost killed us, that had bound us, that had forced us to figure out what 300 years of kings couldn't. We did it. We did it. And then he started laughing. Real laughter, not the bitter kind, the kind that sounded like relief and disbelief and something dangerously close to joy. I'd never heard him laugh before. It was a good sound. The wedding is still scheduled for tomorrow. I know. The entire court will be expecting us to go through with it. I know. We could call it off, tell them the curse is broken and the arrangement is no longer necessary. I looked at him, at this king who'd tried to protect me even while dying, who'd believed me when I said the curse wanted something other than death, who'd laughed like he'd forgotten how and just remembered. We could. Is that what you want? He met my eyes, and the bond that should have disappeared with the curse hummed softly between us. Quieter now, gentler, but still there. I don't know. Ask me tomorrow. I want to be sure I mean it when there's no curse forcing the question. I smiled. He'd remembered my words from 3 days ago. Fair enough. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. But we both knew. The curse was broken. The sword was quiet. And the bond between us wasn't magical compulsion anymore. It was choice. And choice, as it turned out, was far more terrifying than any curse could ever be. The next morning, the court gathered for a wedding. They expected a political arrangement, a necessary sacrifice to break a curse. What they got was something else entirely. But that's a story for tomorrow. For now, the Omega and the king sat in his chambers as the sun rose, watching the sword that had almost killed them both rest peacefully on a table. And for the first time in either of their lives, they weren't waiting to disappear. They were choosing to stay. Chapter 3. The wedding happened exactly as planned. I wore white. Not because I was pure or innocent or any of the things white was supposed to symbolize, but because the king looked at me in the morning and said, "Wear whatever makes you feel most like yourself." And the truth was, I'd never felt more like myself than I did standing in front of a mirror wearing something no one ever thought I'd deserve to wear. The ceremony was brief. The vows were traditional. The court watched with expressions ranging from barely concealed disgust to diplomatic neutrality. No one cheered when the king kissed me, but no one rioted either. Small victories. You're smiling. We were in the reception hall, surrounded by nobles who were pretending to celebrate while actually calculating how this changed the political landscape. I'm thinking about how much this must be killing them, watching an Omega wear a crown. Technically, you're wearing a consort circlet. Semantics. It's still made of gold and sits on my head. That's close enough to a crown to make half this room nauseous. The king's mouth twitched. He was getting better at hiding his amusement, but the bond gave him away. I could feel the laughter he was suppressing like it was my own. We should make an appearance at the Alpha Territories tomorrow. Show unity. Let them see that the curse is broken and the kingdom is stable. You mean let them see that you didn't immediately die from marrying someone beneath you? That too. But we never made it to the territories, because 3 days after the wedding, everything went wrong. It started with a letter, sealed with wax I didn't recognize, and delivered by a messenger who disappeared before anyone could question him. The king opened it in his study. I watched his expression shift from curiosity to stone. What is it? A threat, or a warning, I'm not sure which. He handed me the letter. The words were simple, elegant handwriting, almost polite. The curse may be broken, but the kingdom remembers what Omegas are. If you truly care for your new consort, you'll send them away before someone decides to remind them of their place. Who sent this? I don't know. No signature, no crest, but the wax seal is from the northern packs, the ones who sent 3 alphas to try lifting the sword. The ones who failed spectacularly and looked ridiculous doing it. Yes, which means they have excellent motivation for wanting revenge. I read the letter again. There was something about the phrasing that bothered me. If you truly care for your new consort. Not the kingdom, not your reign, just me. This isn't about the curse. This is about you having weakness now, something they can target. You're not a weakness. To you, maybe not. To them, I'm the most obvious vulnerability you've ever had. An Omega with no pack, no family, no political connections. If they want to hurt you, all they have to do is hurt me. The king's expression went from stone to something darker, something that reminded me he'd been ruling this kingdom for 20 years and had learned how to be cruel when necessary. Let them try. That's not a plan, that's a death wish. Then what would you suggest? I looked at the letter again, at the elegant handwriting and the almost polite threat. Send me away. Absolutely not. Not permanently. Just for a few months, make it look like we're having problems, like the marriage was political necessity and now that the curse is broken, we're separating, taking time apart. No. If they think you've already discarded me, I stop being a useful target, and while they're celebrating their perceived victory, we can figure out who sent this and what they're actually planning. You want me to publicly humiliate you, to make the entire kingdom think I've rejected you just like your mate did. Yes. That's the worst plan I've ever heard. It's strategic. It's torture, for both of us. He crumpled the letter in his fist. The bond may not be a curse anymore, but it's still there. Do you have any idea what it will feel like to be separated when we've barely had 3 days to adjust to it? I did, actually. I'd felt it that morning when he'd gone to a council meeting without me. Like someone had scooped out part of my chest and forgotten to put it back. Not painful exactly, just absent. I know, but if the alternative is waiting around for them to kill me and use my death to destabilize your rule, I'd rather deal with some metaphysical discomfort. Some metaphysical... He stopped, took a breath. You're serious. I'm always serious, I just hide it well. He studied me for a long moment. Then he walked to the window and looked out at the kingdom he'd been dying to protect for 20 years. If we do this, it has to be convincing. The court will be watching for any sign that it's theater. Then make it real. Publicly question the marriage. Suggest that the curse-breaking was coincidence, not because of me. Let rumors spread that you're looking for a more suitable consort. And where will you go? Somewhere they won't think to look. Somewhere I can be useful instead of decorative. The border territories. There's a settlement there that's been requesting aid. Medical supplies, basic infrastructure. If I send you as a representative, it gives you legitimate reason to be gone and puts you somewhere my enemies won't expect me to care about. Perfect. When do I leave? Tomorrow, before I change my mind. The announcement was made at court the next morning. The king stood before the assembled nobles and delivered the news with the same tone he'd used to discuss grain shipments or trade agreements. The consort will be undertaking a tour of the border settlements to assess infrastructure needs. They will be gone for an indefinite period. In their absence, I will be evaluating the continued necessity of this union. The room erupted, not in protest, in barely suppressed glee. I stood next to him, wearing the plainest clothes I'd been given since arriving at the castle, and watched nobles exchange glances that said, "We knew this would happen." One of the alpha lords who'd failed to lift the sword actually smiled at me, like he was already planning my funeral. I left that afternoon. No ceremony, no guards beyond the 2 assigned to escort me to the border. The king didn't come to say goodbye. That was the plan. Make it look real. Make it look like he couldn't be bothered to care. But as the carriage pulled away from the castle, I felt the bond stretch between us like a string pulled too tight, and I knew he was watching from somewhere, feeling the same absence I was feeling. 3 days married, and already separated by necessity and strategy. The universe really did have a sense of humor. The border settlement was exactly as miserable as I'd expected. 30 families living in structures that were one bad storm away from collapse. No clean water source, No medical supplies beyond what they could forage or trade for. Children with visible signs of malnutrition. Elders with injuries that had healed wrong because no one knew how to set bones properly. These were the people the kingdom forgot about. The ones too far from the capital to matter. Too poor to have political influence. Too exhausted to revolt. They looked at me with suspicion when I arrived. An Omega wearing fine clothes and claiming to represent the king. Obviously a joke. Obviously some kind of test. "I'm here to help," I told them. They didn't believe me, so I spent the first week proving it. I organized water collection systems using techniques I'd learned from pack dynamics. I rationed the medical supplies I'd brought and taught them how to make poultices from local plants. I helped rebuild 2 collapsed structures and showed them how to reinforce the others. I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it because I finally had something useful to do with my hands and my mind, and because these people reminded me of who I'd been before the sword. Forgotten. Discarded. Surviving anyway. By the 3rd week, they stopped looking at me like I was a spy. By the 5th week, they started asking questions. "Why would the king send you here?" "To make sure you're not forgotten." "But you're his consort. Shouldn't you be at court?" "I'm more useful here." And I was, but useful didn't fill the absence. The bond ached constantly. Not pain, just awareness. Like knowing someone was thinking about you but being unable to reach them. I'd wake up in the night feeling phantom warmth next to me and remember I was alone in a settlement 6 days' ride from the castle. I wondered if he felt it too. If he woke up reaching for someone who wasn't there. I wondered if this had been a mistake. 2 months into my exile, a messenger arrived. Not from the king, from the court. The message was brief. King Aldrich has announced his intention to choose a new consort. Princess Meredith of the Southern Territories has been invited to court for formal consideration. The ceremony is scheduled for 6 weeks from now. I read it 3 times, then I burned it. "You're leaving." The settlement elder had found me packing my few belongings in the small room they'd given me. "I have to go back." "To watch him marry someone else?" "To make sure he doesn't." She studied me with eyes that had seen too much. "You love him." "I barely know him." "That's not what I asked." I stopped packing, looked at her. At this woman who'd survived things I couldn't imagine and still had the energy to be perceptive. "The bond is still there, even without the curse. I can feel him across 6 days' distance. I know when he's tired, when he's frustrated, when he's pretending everything is fine while dying inside. If that's love, then yes. If that's just magical residue from a broken curse, then I'm delusional." "Could be both." "Could be." She helped me finish packing. "What will you do when you get there?" "I don't know. Probably something stupid." "Good. Stupid is memorable, and you've been forgotten enough for one lifetime." She was right. I'd been invisible my entire life, overlooked, dismissed, cast aside. But I'd lifted the moon sword. I'd broken a 300-year curse with nothing but words and understanding. I'd helped a settlement survive when the kingdom had abandoned them. Maybe it was time to stop being invisible. The journey back took 5 days. I pushed harder than I should have, sleeping only when my body physically gave out. The bond pulled at me the entire time, growing stronger with each mile. By the time I reached the capital, I could feel him like he was standing next to me. His confusion, his exhaustion, his carefully controlled desperation. He hadn't wanted this. Whatever was happening at court, he hadn't chosen it, which meant someone had forced his hand. I arrived the night before the ceremony. The castle was decorated for a celebration. Flowers, banners, music drifting from the great hall where nobles were already gathering. I didn't announce myself, didn't go through official channels. I climbed. The king's chambers had a window that led to a balcony. The balcony connected to a trellis that someone with climbing experience could scale without much difficulty. I'd noticed it on my wedding night and thought, that's a security risk. Now, I was grateful for it. I pulled myself over the balcony railing and found the king sitting at his desk, staring at papers he wasn't reading. The bond snapped taut the moment I landed. He stood so fast his chair fell over. "You're here." "I'm here." You shouldn't be. If they find you, then they'll know I came back, that the rejected Omega is stupid enough to crash a royal wedding for the second time. Let them see. He crossed the room in 3 strides and stopped just short of touching me, like he wasn't sure he was allowed. Tell me what's happening. Someone found the letters, the ones from the Northern Pacts. They presented them to the council as evidence that our marriage is creating instability, that my attachment to you makes me vulnerable to manipulation. So they forced you to choose someone else. They gave me an ultimatum: marry someone politically advantageous and prove the kingdom comes first, or risk civil war. 3 territories are threatening secession if I don't distance myself from the Omega problem. And Princess Meredith is politically advantageous. She's an alpha from a powerful bloodline, beautiful, connected, everything you're not supposed to be. He said it like an accusation, like being those things was a crime. I've been stalling for 6 weeks, trying to find another solution, but tomorrow you marry her. Unless you have a better plan. I looked at him, at this king who'd been maneuvered into choosing between me and his kingdom, who'd spent 6 weeks pretending to court someone else while the bond between us screamed at the distance. I do, actually, but you're going to hate it. I already hate this. Tell me. You marry her. You go through with the ceremony. He stared at me like I'd suggested he set himself on fire. That's your plan? I marry someone else? You marry her in name only, a political arrangement, and then we expose whoever's been manipulating this situation, because someone wanted me gone, someone wanted you vulnerable, and they've been orchestrating this since before the curse broke. How do you know? Because the first threat letter arrived 3 days after our wedding, before anyone had time to organize a conspiracy, which means it was already planned. Whoever sent it was waiting for the curse to break so they could use me as leverage. The king went very still. You think this is about more than us? I think someone wants your throne, and they're using our bond to get it. They knew you'd protect me, knew you'd be willing to compromise to keep me safe. So they created a situation where protecting me looks like weakness and abandoning me looks like strength. Then we don't play their game. I refuse to marry Meredith and we fight whoever comes. And 3 territories secede, and your kingdom fractures. And everyone you've spent 20 years protecting suffers because you chose one Omega over stability. Don't ask me to choose the kingdom over you. I'm not. I'm asking you to choose both. Marry Meredith tomorrow. Make them think they won. And then we hunt down whoever did this and make them regret it. He looked at me like I was insane. Maybe I was. But I'd spent 2 months in a border settlement helping people survive. I'd seen what happened when kingdoms fractured and leadership failed. I'd seen children starve because nobles played politics with supply lines. I wasn't going to let that happen because of me. This won't work. They'll expect you to leave, to run. Then I'll disappoint them. I'm staying, right here in the castle. Let them see me. Let them wonder why I'm not devastated. Let them realize their plan isn't working. You'll be in danger. I've been in danger my entire life. At least now I have a reason worth the risk. The king reached out and finally touched me. His hand cupped my face like I was something precious instead of something disposable. I don't want to marry her. I know. He stopped, swallowed. The bond is different now. Not compulsion, but still there, still pulling at me. I can't tell where the magic ends and what I actually feel begins. Then figure it out after we deal with whoever's trying to destroy your kingdom. We have time. Do we? I leaned into his touch, feeling the bond settle for the first time in 2 months. Ask me tomorrow. I want to be sure you mean it when there's no threat forcing the question. He smiled, small and broken and so real it hurt. You keep using my own words against me. They were good words, would be ashamed to waste them. I left before dawn, climbed back down the trellis and disappeared into the castle like a ghost. The wedding happened exactly as planned. Princess Meredith was everything I wasn't. Tall, powerful, confident. She wore gold and looked like she was born to rule. The court loved her. The king married her with all the enthusiasm of someone agreeing to their own execution, and I watched from the back of the hall, wearing servant's clothes, feeling the bond stretch and fracture and somehow hold. Because here's what they didn't know. The moon sword had chosen me for a reason. Not because I wanted to die, but because I understood what it meant to be used as a weapon and still choose to be held. And I was done being a weapon in someone else's game. They wanted me gone? Fine. I'd stay invisible just long enough to figure out who was pulling the strings, and then I'd show them exactly what a rejected Omega could do when they stopped trying to disappear. Chapter 4. The new queen moved into the castle like she owned it, which technically she did now. Princess Meredith of the Southern Territories was efficient. I'd give her that. Within 3 days, she'd reorganized the household staff, established new protocols for court appearances, and made it very clear that the Omega situation was resolved. Except I was still there, living in servant quarters, wearing plain clothes, attending court functions as part of the background staff that nobles never actually looked at. Being invisible had its advantages. I spent my days listening, watching, learning who spoke to whom, which nobles clustered together during breaks in council sessions, who received sealed letters delivered by private messengers. The bond made it easier. I could feel when the king was in meetings, when he was frustrated, when he was pretending to pay attention to his new wife while his mind was somewhere else entirely. He knew I was still in the castle. I'd sent him one message through a servant I trusted. "I'm hunting. Don't interfere." He hadn't responded, but I felt his reluctant acceptance through the bond, followed by something that might have been pride. The first real lead came 2 weeks after the wedding. I was serving wine at a dinner for visiting nobles when I overheard a conversation that made my blood freeze. Surprised the king went through with it, thought his attachment to the Omega might prove stronger than his sense. The letters worked perfectly. Nothing motivates quite like the threat of watching someone you care about suffer. And now that the little problem is handled, we can move to the next phase. I kept my expression neutral, kept pouring wine like I hadn't heard a thing. What is the next phase exactly? The noble who spoke was Lord Cassius from the Northern Territories, one of the alphas who'd failed to lift the sword. Patience. The king is weakened now, married to someone he doesn't want, separated from the one the bond actually chose. Give it another month and he'll be too fractured to resist when we make our move. I finished serving and left the room. My hands were shaking. They'd planned this, all of it. The threats, the forced marriage, everything designed to break the king by using the bond against him. But what was the next phase? What move were they planning? I needed more information, and I needed it from someone who'd know the details. Which meant I needed to do something incredibly stupid. That night, I broke into Lord Cassius's chambers. Not through the door, through the window. 3 stories up, using the same climbing skills that had gotten me onto the king's balcony. His rooms were exactly what I'd expected. Expensive, ostentatious, and absolutely covered in correspondence. I rifled through his desk, looking for anything that mentioned plans or timelines or... looking for something? I spun around. Lord Cassius stood in the doorway, blocking my exit. He wasn't alone. 2 guards flanked him, hands on their weapons. "Just admiring your interior decorating. Very excessive. You have remarkable nerve for someone who should have disappeared months ago." He stepped into the room. "Tell me, does the king know his former consort is playing spy? Or are you acting independently in some misguided attempt to prove your worth?" "I'm just here for information. What's the next phase?" He smiled. It was the kind of smile that made me understand why people feared alphas. "The next phase is removing a weak king who compromised his kingdom for an Omega. The territories are already aligned. We have support from 4 major packs. All we needed was to prove he couldn't make hard decisions." He made one. He married Meredith. He hesitated. For 6 weeks, he stalled and searched for alternatives. That's not strength. That's sentiment. And sentiment is a liability we can't afford. "So you'll do what? Kill him?" Nothing so crude. We'll force him to abdicate. Present evidence of his instability to the council. His attachment to you was just the beginning. We've been documenting every decision he's made that prioritizes mercy over strength. Every policy that protects the weak instead of rewarding the powerful. I stared at him. At this alpha who saw compassion as weakness and cruelty as strength. You're going to destroy a good king because he cares about his people. We're going to replace a weak king with leadership that understands power. The moon sword chose wrong. The curse breaking was an accident, not a validation. And now we're correcting the mistake. He gestured to the guards. Take them to the tower. We'll decide what to do with the Omega after the coronation ceremony. What coronation? But I didn't get to finish the question. One of the guards grabbed my arm and I felt cold steel press against my ribs. They weren't playing anymore. The tower was exactly as pleasant as it sounded. Stone walls, one window too small to climb through, a door that locked from the outside. I was trapped, and according to Lord Cassius, there was going to be a coronation ceremony, which meant they were moving faster than I'd thought. I needed to warn the king, needed to tell him what was coming, but I had no way to reach him, no messenger, no access to anything beyond this cell. Except the bond. I'd never tried to communicate through it before, didn't even know if it was possible, but we'd broken a 300-year curse with nothing but intent and words. Maybe intent was enough. I closed my eyes and focused on the bond, on the thread of connection that tied me to the king even across distance and stone walls. They're planning to force you to abdicate. Lord Cassius and the Northern Territories. They have support from 4 major pacts. They're calling it a coronation ceremony. I didn't know if it worked. Couldn't tell if the message reached him or if I was just shouting into the void. But the bond pulsed once. Twice. And I felt something that might have been acknowledgement. Or might have been hope. They came for me 3 days later. Not to execute me. To drag me to the throne room where apparently the coronation ceremony was about to begin. The room was packed. Every noble in the kingdom had gathered. The king stood at the center, looking exhausted and furious and utterly cornered. Queen Meredith stood beside him, wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. Lord Cassius and 3 other Alpha Lords stood before the throne, holding a document that I knew without reading was the abdication decree. King Aldrich, Lord Cassius announced, voice carrying through the hall. You have been called before this assembly to answer for decisions that have compromised the stability of this kingdom. The king's eyes found mine across the room. The bond flared between us, and I felt his barely controlled rage. I'm aware of the charges. Let's hear them. You broke protocol by allowing an Omega to lift the moon sword. You married said Omega despite advisement against it. You then abandoned political duty to pursue a personal attachment that weakened your position. And when forced to correct this mistake, you hesitated for 6 weeks, demonstrating an inability to prioritize kingdom over sentiment. The crowd murmured, some in agreement, some in disapproval. These are not the actions of a strong king. They are the actions of someone compromised by emotion and unfit to rule. And your solution? Voluntary abdication. You step down peacefully, and we install leadership better suited to guide this kingdom into strength. And if I refuse? Then we do this the hard way. We present evidence of your instability to the council. We force a vote of no confidence. We make this public and ugly and humiliating for everyone involved. Lord Cassius gestured to the guards holding me, and we ensure that those you care about understand the consequences of your stubbornness. The threat was clear. Sign the decree or I'd suffer for it. The king looked at me. The bond between us was screaming, not with fear, with fury. You think threatening an Omega will convince me you're fit to rule? We think it will convince you to be reasonable. Sign the decree, walk away, live quietly somewhere with your former consort. We'll even allow it. Consider it mercy. The king stepped forward, close enough that the Alpha Lords tensed, hands moving to weapons. Mercy. That's what you're calling this? Forcing abdication through threats and manipulation? We're calling it necessary correction. Now sign or... The king transformed, not into his wolf form, into something else entirely, something I'd never seen before. His eyes went completely silver, the same color as the moon sword's light, and when he spoke, his voice carried power that made the walls shake. The moon sword didn't choose wrong. It chose exactly who it needed. Someone who understood what it meant to be used as a weapon. Someone who knew the difference between strength and cruelty. He looked directly at me. And someone who taught me the same lesson. The sword, which had been resting against the throne, lifted on its own. It floated through the air, silver light pouring from the blade, and stopped directly in front of me. The guards released me and backed away. Everyone did. Even Lord Cassius looked uncertain. The sword was offering itself to me again. "What's happening?" someone whispered. "The sword is choosing." It already chose, 3 months ago. Exactly. The king's voice was still carrying that otherworldly resonance. The curse wasn't just broken, it was transformed. The sword isn't bound to the crown anymore, it's bound to whoever understands what power should actually mean. I reached out and took the sword's hilt. The moment my fingers wrapped around it, light exploded through the throne room. Not destructive, revealing. Every person in that room suddenly saw what I'd seen, what the sword had recognized in me. The years of rejection, the casual cruelty, the systematic dehumanization of being told you're worthless until you almost believe it. But also, the survival. The refusal to become cruel in response to cruelty. The choice to help a border settlement instead of wallowing in exile. The decision to come back and fight instead of running. And they saw the king. His 20 years of dying slowly. His attempts to protect his people even while the curse consumed him. His choice to marry someone he didn't love to prevent civil war. They saw everything. When the light faded, the throne room was silent. Lord Cassius stood frozen, face pale. "You talk about strength," I said quietly, "about rewarding power and punishing weakness, but you don't understand what power actually is." I raised the sword, not threateningly, just holding it up so everyone could see. Power is choosing mercy when cruelty would be easier. It's protecting those weaker than you instead of exploiting them. It's making hard decisions that hurt you personally, but help your people. I looked at the king. It's marrying someone you don't love to prevent war, and it's breaking a 300-year curse with nothing but words, because you finally understand what the curse was actually asking for. The king stepped forward. The silver faded from his eyes, leaving them their normal color. Tired, human, real. The sword doesn't recognize strength. It recognizes integrity. And it chose an Omega who spent their entire life being told they were worthless and never once believed it. He turned to face the assembled nobles. "So here's what's going to happen. Lord Cassius and his co-conspirators will be charged with treason and conspiracy. The territories threatening secession will be given one chance to reconsider, and anyone who believes that compassion is weakness is welcome to find another kingdom to serve." His voice dropped to something dangerous, "because I'm done pretending that cruelty is strength." Lord Cassius found his voice. "You can't do this. We have support. You have nothing." Queen Meredith spoke for the first time. Everyone turned to stare at her. She stepped forward, removing the crown from her head. "I was approached 6 months ago with this plan, told that if I married the king, I'd be positioned to take real power when you forced his abdication, that I could rule in name while you controlled policy." She looked at Lord Cassius with undisguised contempt. "I agreed, because I wanted to see how far you'd go, what you'd be willing to do. And now I know." She turned to the king. "I don't love you, but I respect what you've built here, and I won't be part of tearing it down." She placed the crown on the throne and stepped back. The marriage was political theater. We both know it. Annul it. Marry who you actually want, and I'll return to the Southern Territories with enough evidence of this conspiracy to ensure they never try this again. The king stared at her. "You were testing them? Someone had to. You were too busy dying and then too busy being in love to see the bigger picture." She said it without judgment, just fact. The Omega was right. This was orchestrated before the curse broke. They've been planning this for years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She pulled out several letters from her dress. All the evidence you need. Correspondence between Lord Cassius and 5 other territories, plans to fracture the kingdom and redistribute power, timelines, strategies, everything. Lord Cassius lunged for the letters. He didn't make it 3 steps. The sword in my hand pulsed once, and he froze mid-stride. Not by force, by recognition, the same way it had recognized me months ago. It saw him, saw his cruelty and ambition and willingness to destroy lives for power, and it rejected him. He collapsed to his knees, gasping. "Arrest him," the king said quietly, "and anyone who collaborated with this." Guards moved forward, took Lord Cassius and 3 other nobles into custody. The rest of the court watched in stunned silence. The king turned to me. The bond between us was steady now, calm, sure. "I need to ask you something." "Now?" "Now. Before anything else happens. Before more time passes and we convince ourselves there's a better moment." He crossed the throne room, stopped directly in front of me. "Will you marry me? Not because of a sword or a curse or political necessity, but because in 3 months you've become the person I reach for in the dark, the voice I hear when I need to remember why I'm doing this, the one who taught me that strength and compassion aren't opposites." He paused. "Ask me tomorrow if you need to be sure I mean it." I looked at him, at this king who'd been forced to marry someone else and still found a way to fight for me, who'd sent me to a border settlement to keep me safe and trusted me to come back, who'd stood in front of his entire court and declared that compassion wasn't weakness. "I don't need tomorrow, I'm sure." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." He kissed me in front of the entire court, not tentatively, not carefully, like someone who'd been dying of thirst and finally found water. The bond settled between us, no longer pulled taut, just there. A connection that had survived curse-breaking and separation and conspiracy. When we finally broke apart, the throne room was completely silent. Then someone started clapping. Then someone else. Within moments, the entire room erupted. Not everyone was happy. I could see nobles whose expressions ranged from disgust to barely concealed fury. But enough were cheering that it didn't matter. Queen Meredith approached us, smiling. "You owe me a favor, a significant one." "Name it." "Alliance treaty between our territories, fair trade agreements, and occasional visits because honestly, you two are the most entertaining thing that's happened in politics in decades." "Done." She turned to me. "Take care of him. He's sentimental and impulsive, and genuinely believes people are inherently good." "I know." "Good. Someone needs to balance that out." She swept from the room, taking the evidence and her dignity with her. The king pulled me close, whispering so only I could hear. "We're going to have to clean up this conspiracy for months." "I know." "The court is going to fight the marriage." "I know." 3 territories are still threatening secession. "We'll handle it." "You're remarkably calm about this." I leaned into him, feeling the bond hum contentedly between us. "I spent 2 months in a border settlement helping people survive. I was locked in a tower for 3 days with no food. I just broke up a conspiracy in front of your entire court while holding a magic sword." I looked up at him. "Compared to that? Political cleanup sounds relaxing." He laughed, real laughter, the kind that said he was too exhausted and relieved and overwhelmed to do anything else. "I love you." It was the first time either of us had said it out loud. "I know. The bond kind of gives it away." "Say it back." "Make me." "I'm the king. I could have you arrested for insubordination." "You could try." He kissed me again, softer this time, like we had all the time in the world. When he pulled back, I said it. "I love you too, even though you made terrible strategic decisions and got yourself trapped in a political nightmare." "I broke a 300-year curse." "After I figured out how." "I married you twice." Once under duress, and once after I crashed your second wedding. You're impossible. You like impossible. I really do. We stood there in the throne room, surrounded by the mess we'd have to clean up, the conspiracies we'd have to dismantle, the court we'd have to win over. The sword rested between us, quiet and content. It had found what it was looking for. Not someone strong enough to wield it, someone brave enough to understand it. And for the first time in 300 years, the moon sword was exactly where it wanted to be. In the hands of someone who knew what power should actually mean. Epilogue. 1 year later. The border settlement I'd spent 2 months in had changed. Clean water now flowed through a system the king had commissioned. The structures had been rebuilt, properly this time, with materials that would last through storms and winters. A healer visited twice monthly, teaching locals how to treat common injuries and illnesses. Children played in yards that used to be mud pits. Elders sat on porches that didn't creak ominously with every step. And in the center of the settlement, there was a marker. Simple stone, engraved with words the people had chosen themselves, not forgotten. I stood looking at it, feeling the familiar weight of the circlet on my head. Not a crown. I'd refused that. But the consort's circlet I'd worn at my first wedding, the one that had survived conspiracy and separation and political nightmares. The king's hand found mine. You're smiling. I'm thinking about how much has changed. For the better? Mostly. He laughed quietly. We'd learned to find humor in mostly, because perfect wasn't realistic when you were trying to reshape a kingdom's understanding of power. The past year had been brutal. Lord Cassius and his co-conspirators had been tried and convicted. 2 territories had actually attempted secession and been dealt with through a combination of negotiation and strategic pressure. The court had fought our second marriage every step of the way until the king made it clear that anyone who couldn't accept an Omega consort was welcome to find employment elsewhere. 17 nobles had left, 43 had stayed, and slowly, painfully slowly, things had begun to shift. The king had instituted new policies, protection for Omegas who'd been systemically exploited, resources for border settlements that had been ignored for decades, councils that included voices from every rank, not just alphas and nobility. Some called it weakness, most called it overdue, and the ones who'd lived their entire lives being told they didn't matter, they called it hope. There's something I need to show you. The king led me away from the settlement marker, down a path that hadn't existed when I'd been here before. It opened into a clearing where a building stood, new construction, beautiful stonework, large enough to be significant but not ostentatious. What is this? A school. For anyone who wants to learn. Reading, writing, mathematics, trade skills. No cost, no rank requirements, just opportunity. He looked at me. I'm calling it the Moon Sword Academy, after the thing that taught me what power actually means. I stared at the building, at the brass plaque beside the door that read exactly what he'd said. You built a school. We built a school. This was your idea. You're the one who spent 2 months here teaching people how to survive. I just provided resources. You provided more than resources. Then we both did our part. He was right. We had. The sword, the moon sword that had started everything, hung in the throne room now. Not as a weapon, as a reminder. Anyone could approach it, touch it. Remember that power wasn't about who could lift the heaviest burden, but about who understood what burdens were worth carrying. Do you ever regret it? Regret what? Lifting the sword that first time, everything that came after. I thought about it, really thought about it. The curse, the conspiracy, the separation, the months of political warfare and court battles, and nobles who looked at me like I was a stain on their kingdom. No. No? I spent my entire life being invisible, being told I was worthless, and then a magic sword recognized something in me that no one else had ever bothered to look for. I turned to face him. It saw someone who'd been used as a weapon and still chose to be held, someone who understood what it meant to be broken and decided that didn't mean useless. And now? Now I'm consort to a king who's rebuilding an entire kingdom's understanding of strength. I help run councils that actually include people who've been ignored for centuries. I visit settlements and make sure they're not forgotten. I reached up and touched the circlet on my head. I'm still broken in some ways. The scars don't disappear just because circumstances change, but I'm not invisible anymore, and I'm not worthless. You never were. I know, but now I believe it. He pulled me close, and I felt the bond hum between us. It was quieter these days, less urgent. We'd learned to trust it instead of being controlled by it. I need to tell you something. Sounds ominous. Queen Meredith sent a message. She wants to visit next month. Something about that favor I owe her. What kind of favor? She wouldn't say, just that it involves her younger sibling who's apparently causing problems, and she thinks we might be able to help. I raised an eyebrow. We're not running a reformatory for problematic royals. I tried explaining that. She said, and I quote, "You reformed yourself from a dying tyrant to someone who builds schools. You can handle one rebellious beta with identity issues." She called you a dying tyrant? It was said with affection. That's not how affection works. With Meredith it is. We both laughed, because if the past year had taught us anything, it was that allies came in unexpected forms, and Meredith, despite the political marriage that had nearly destroyed us, had become one of our strongest supporters. Will you come with me? Where? Back to the castle. We have a council meeting in 3 days. Something about trade disputes and territory agreements. Sounds thrilling. It's actually mind-numbingly boring, which is why I need you there to make sarcastic comments that I can pretend not to hear. That's what you value me for? Sarcasm during council meetings? Among other things. He kissed me there in the clearing, with the school behind us and the settlement in the distance. The bond settled warm and content between us. When we broke apart, I asked the question I'd been asking for a year now, the one that had become our ritual. Will you marry me? He smiled, the same answer he always gave. We're already married. Twice. I know, but I want to keep choosing you. Then yes, today, tomorrow, and every day after. It was the promise we made to each other, not the one the sword had required, not the one the kingdom expected, just the one we chose. We walked back toward the settlement together, toward the people who'd once looked at me with suspicion and now waved as we passed, toward the children who ran up asking if the king would show them how he transformed, toward the elders who nodded respectfully at both of us, no longer questioning whether an omega belonged next to a king. The moon sword had promised the king a partner. It had promised me freedom. Neither of us expected it to deliver both in the same broken, impossible person. But prophecies, like people, were better when they surprised you. That night, back in the castle, I found the king in his study. He was reading reports, but I could feel through the bond that his mind was elsewhere. What are you thinking about? The sword, the curse, everything that happened. Regretting it? Never. Just marveling at it. He set down the papers and looked at me. 300 years of kings tried to break that curse with strength and magic and sacrifice, and it took an omega with nothing to lose and everything to prove to figure out what it actually wanted. Understanding. Recognition. Same thing, really. He stood and crossed to where I was standing by the window. The moon was full tonight, casting silver light across the kingdom below. Do you remember what the sword asked you? That first time you touched it? It asked if I knew what it meant to be forgotten, used, discarded. And you said yes. Because I did know. I'd lived it. He touched the side of my face gently. The sword wasn't asking if you'd been those things. It was asking if you'd let those things define you. I'd never thought about it that way. And I said yes anyway. Because you understood the difference between being broken and being destroyed, between surviving and surrendering. He pressed his forehead to mine. That's what the curse needed. Someone who knew that worthlessness was a lie people told, not a truth you had to accept. You figured that out too, eventually. I had a good teacher. We stood there as the moonlight painted us both in silver, the same color as the veins that had once spread across my arms, marking me for death. Now they were gone, but the lessons remained. Power wasn't about who could carry the heaviest burden, it was about choosing what burdens were worth carrying at all. I love you. He said it like a prayer, like a promise, like the answer to a question I'd stopped asking because I finally believed it. I love you too, even though you're sentimental and build schools and genuinely believe people are inherently good. Someone has to. I suppose someone does. I kissed him, soft and sure and certain. Ask me tomorrow. Ask you what? If I'll marry you. I want to be sure you mean it when there's no moonlight making this moment feel more magical than it is. He smiled, the same smile he'd given me a year ago when I'd used his words against him for the first time. Tomorrow, then. But we both knew the answer. Tomorrow. The day after. The day after that. Every day we'd choose each other, not because a curse bound us, not because a sword demanded it, but because we'd learned something that 300 years of magic couldn't teach, that the strongest promises weren't the ones sealed in blood or starlight. They were the ones kept in ordinary moments, in council meetings and border settlements, in schools built for forgotten people, in a king who chose compassion over cruelty, and in an Omega who chose to stay visible instead of disappearing. The moon sword rested in the throne room, quiet and content. It had found what it was looking for, not someone worthy, someone who understood that worthiness was something you decided for yourself, and in the end, that was the most powerful magic of all. Years later, when scholars studied the breaking of the moon sword curse, they'd argue about what actually broke it. Some said it was true love, some said it was sacrifice, some said it was understanding. They were all partially right, but if you ask the Omega who lifted the sword, the one who'd been rejected and discarded and told they were worthless, they'd tell you something different. The curse didn't break because someone was strong enough. It broke because someone was brave enough to say, I know what you are. I know what they made you, and I'm choosing to hold you anyway. And in a world that measured worth in strength and power and bloodline, that simple act of recognition, that was revolutionary. The King and the Omega ruled together for 43 years. They built 17 more schools. They reshaped policies that had oppressed Omegas for centuries. They survived 3 more conspiracies, 2 assassination attempts, and 1 particularly aggressive trade dispute that nearly started a war. They adopted 4 children, all of them from families who couldn't care for them, all of them told they were unwanted, and they proved over and over that the sword hadn't chosen wrong. When the king finally died, peacefully in his sleep, at an age that defied all medical expectations, the Omega held his hand and whispered the words they'd been saying for 4 decades. Ask me tomorrow. And though he couldn't answer, the bond pulsed once, soft and sure. Yes. The Omega lived another 7 years after that, long enough to see their oldest child take the throne, long enough to watch the kingdom they'd helped build continue to grow and change, long enough to know that the work they'd started would continue long after they were gone. On their final day, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and a kingdom that had learned to measure worth differently, they touched the moon sword one last time. It pulsed with recognition, the same recognition it had shown that first day in the amphitheater. Forgotten, used, discarded. Do you still know these words? The Omega smiled. I remember them, but they don't define me anymore. Then what defines you? Chosen, held, loved. The sword's light flared once. Approval, understanding, completion. And when the Omega closed their eyes for the last time, they weren't afraid, because they'd learned something that fear could never touch, that worthlessness was a lie, that power meant protecting, not dominating, that promises kept in ordinary moments were stronger than any magic, and that sometimes being broken wasn't the end of your story. It was just the beginning of understanding what strength actually meant. The moon sword passed to the Omega's oldest child, not because of bloodline, not because of strength, but because they too understood what it meant to be underestimated, and they too chose compassion over cruelty. The sword recognized them immediately, and so the cycle continued, not of curse and death, but of recognition and choice. Generation after generation of people who understood that the heaviest burdens were worth carrying, that the forgotten deserved to be seen, that the broken could still be beautiful. And in the throne room, on a plaque beside where the moon sword rested, there were words engraved in silver, the same words that had been carved into the headboard of the King and Omega's bed, the same words they'd whispered to each other for 43 years. A promise kept is stronger than any curse cast. Choose each other. Every day. That is what power means. This story was inspired by everyone who's ever been told they were worthless and chose to prove them wrong. Not by becoming what they wanted, but by deciding what you were worth yourself. You are not forgotten. You are not invisible. You are not worthless. And your story is just beginning.